one thing that I want to do.
Okay, let's get started.
Yep.
So our speaker today is Sinhababu, who is an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy at the National University of Singapore. And he's published in philosophy of mind, metaphysics, epistemology, and on Nietzsche. But perhaps he's best known for his work on possible girls, which is, I think David Bourget was telling us last night that it's one of the most downloaded papers on filters. I think it's the most downloaded paper on papers, which gives you a step-by-step guide to getting a girlfriend in another possible world, or any kind of partner, any kind of romantic partner. I guess, or non-romantic would also work, but anyways, yeah. But he's also written a book called Human Nature, which I guess is on human nature, and he's edited a volume with Brian Leiter, right, on Nietzsche. Yeah. Please welcome Neil.
Thanks everybody. Thanks Angela for setting all this up, and Michael as well for organizing things through the Rocket Institute. I'm going to tell you about my two arguments for pleasure fundamentalism. So what is this thesis? Well, it's the thesis that moral value is pleasure, and this explains all other moral facts. So it has two big, important philosophical consequences. One is ethical hedonism. The view is that pleasure is the sole good thing. This is useful if you're trying to build your way to hedonic utilitarianism, the idea that the right action is whatever creates the most pleasure, that old-fashioned view that is associated with like Jeremy Bentham and people like that. So that's ethical hedonism. And the other, so that's an ethical, normative ethical theory that just tells you what's right and wrong and virtuous and all that. The other part of it is naturalistic moral realism, the view that moral facts are known empirically and fully explained by things in space and time, because you can know what pleasure is like empirically by introspecting it, and pleasure happens to be within space and time, so you've got everything you need to make naturalistic moral realism true. The objective moral facts are sort of here around us in the spatiotemporal world. So there's two arguments that are for pleasure fundamentalism that I'm going to present today. This first argument, the reliability argument, is what made me a hedonic utilitarian many, many years ago. But I'm just going to use it sort of for defensive purposes here, as I'll explain. The other argument is the one I'm going to spend the most time on. So here's the three premises of this reliability argument. What this is going to do is sort of examine our evidence about what's right and wrong, good and bad, just our evidence about the moral facts. And we're going to see which beliefs in moral facts come through reliable processes and which come through unreliable processes. Reliable processes are those that systematically generate belief in the truth, and unreliable processes are those that systematically generate false belief. So we're going to see just like how are our moral beliefs coming up, and then one thing you can do, this is the first premise, truth ratio induction, is the reliability of the process. How frequently it generates truth gives you a probability of truth for the generated beliefs. So some processes, just to explain what this means, are reliable, like visual perception. It's not that everything, it's not infallible. Sometimes, what you see is not what there is, but for the most part, you can trust your vision to tell you what there is in a lot of ordinary circumstances. So if you are trusting vision, to use the probability people's metaphor, it's sort of like, they talk about you're drawing balls out of an urn where there's a certain number of one color and a certain number of the other color, and that, how many there are determines the probability that you'll pull out a blue ball rather than a red ball. You can sort of see this as, belief formation involves like picking beliefs from urns that have a certain number of balls in them, and visual perception is full of true balls rather than false balls. Or there are a few false balls in there, but you have a high probability of truth if you get your beliefs from visual perception. But if you get your beliefs through some other process, I like to use wishful thinking as my example of like an unreliable process. You are drawing from an urn with a lot of false balls in it. So the probability that you'll get a false belief through wishful thinking is actually kind of high in most cases. So yeah, process reliability in that way suggests a probability of truth for the generated beliefs. If they're systematic, if a process was infallible at the sort of far end of this, I don't know if anything is that way, but then you would be justified in being absolutely certain once you learned about the infallibility and be like, yeah, I should trust everything that comes in here. So yeah, that's how reliability bears on the probabilities we should assign. Please feel free to come up and get the handouts that are up here. There are plenty of handouts that they are important, so they will help you understand the talk. You can also you can retreat if you please. Yeah. So just make sure you get a handout. Great. Second premise here is this experiencing pleasure premise. So this is going to describe a reliable process for forming your moral beliefs. People are generally good at knowing what their experiences are like. If you have an experience of color or of sound, well, you can tell whether it's color or sound. If it's a color experience, you can tell that those have a certain level of brightness to them, and sound experiences have a certain level of volume to them, and it's not that the colors have the volume and the sounds have the brightness, for at least ordinary experiences that most humans have, and you can tell if you're doing something different. If you've done something to your head that makes you, experience things differently, you can tell it then, but for the most part, what we're doing is we can tell that the colors are the ones with the brightness and the sounds are the ones with the volume. You can tell what your experiences are like pretty well. I think that way you can know by looking inward at your experiences of pleasure that they are good in a certain way. And if you look at an experience like pain, with the broader class being displeasure, which includes emotional displeasures, well, in that case, you can just feel the badness of that. And this is why terms like it feels good, it feels bad, are just natural ways of expressing the level of pleasure you're having. If you are having some degree of pleasure, you'd say it feels good. If you're having some degree of displeasure, you'd say it feels bad. This works for both sensory, sort of physical pleasures and emotional pleasures. It feels good to see, your beloved friend finally succeed after a lot of hard time, failing, and it feels bad to see your beloved friend fail again. These are just like emotional things, and you can get those feelings too, just physical or emotional. This theory is just about pleasure no matter what form it takes. If we make physical pleasure, great. If we make emotional pleasure, great. If we cause displeasure of any kind, bad. So that's what pleasure fundamentalism says. The third premise is broad unreliability. Actually, I should say something first about the second premise. It's supposed to include the pleasure of others too, because the same way that you know that other people's sound experiences have a volume dimension. I mean, you only experience your own sound experiences, but you can know that other people, when they have sound experiences, their sound experiences have a volume dimension too. The same way, whatever that way is, you know that their pleasure experiences have a goodness dimension. If it's like the experiences you're having, it's going to be the same way, and the same stuff is going to be in it. If it's the same kind of experience. If it's pleasure, it'll have that goodness. Just like if it's sound, it'll have that volume. No matter who has it, when they have it, if it's the same thing, it'll have the same stuff in it. So the third premise is broad unreliability. This is probably the most controversial of these, and what I think here is no other independently reliable processes generate substantive moral beliefs. With substantive moral beliefs being beliefs just about what's good, right, virtuous, and so on. Why do I think this? Why do I think that this experiencing pleasure way is the only way to get reliably generated moral beliefs? Well, it's because of what convinced me is the vast amount of severe moral disagreement that I see when I look at the world sort of historically and across cultures. And the example that is just like kind of horrifying to me is the sheer number of different societies that have thought it right to commit genocide against people around them. That's just a thing that happens a whole lot in human history. And I don't know if there are more people in human history who thought it was heroic or obligatory or otherwise, well, at least permissible to commit genocide against their neighbors, or if there are more people who, thought, no, that can't ever be okay. So I just don't know which there are more of. And in this situation, there's so many people who are so severely wrong that some giant source of unreliability is sort of coming at us. And I have some thoughts about like what process is getting us this way. Well, people see the moral world in the way their emotions tell them to. Their emotional responses, if they just hate another people, they'll just see it as worthwhile to do horrible things to those people. And their own people who they love, they might, see it a different way. So this process of reading the outside world off of your emotions is just something that I think is leading us into lots of error. I mean, sometimes if you get the right emotions loaded into you by your society, it could lead you right. But you can't count on that. A lot of societies have done it in a way that leads you wrong. And you can see that by how much disagreement there is between different societies. The disagreement implies that somebody's in error. And if enough people are in error, if there's enough disagreement, a ton of people have to be wrong, and the reliability of the underlying process has to be pretty disastrous. So when we're making ordinary moral judgments not in the experiencing pleasure way, we are picking out of a urn with a lot of false balls in it. And don't do that if you want true belief. So that's sort of how I got pleasure is probably the only good thing. It's basically, yeah, if you pick out of the place where you get the true beliefs, you get this belief. And if you pick out of the place where you get the false beliefs, whatever other processes are leading people to these massive disagreement about genocide with us, I mean, then, okay, that's probably a way to not get the truth. So trust the things that reliably give you the truth, believe that pleasure, wherever it shows up in the world, is good. So that's the argument that made me a utilitarian. I'm making an is to ought move here. I'm actually using empirical, scientifically discoverable information about processes of belief formation to generate, probabilities of truth for moral theories. And how do I do that? Well, here's the formula for getting from is to ought. Process P, which generates belief in moral proposition M, has truth ratio T. Processes like visual perception and wishful thinking, moral propositions, pleasure is good, or committing genocide is permissible in the bad cases. Truth ratio T, that's like how frequently they generate true belief.
You didn't say if you wanted interruptions or not, but I think on this, if I might,
Yeah, hey, go ahead.
because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to follow the rest of it until I
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
How does the sometimes genocide appears permissible to a society and the pleasure principle here? Because maybe they enjoy
Right.
it. So how do those two things fit together?
So there's different processes generating these beliefs. So that's the sort of so this talk I'm not going to go deep into the cognitive science of this, but the explanations I'm seeing coming up from the cognitive science literature are generally, people have emotional responses that generate one. In general, that's how our beliefs come about. But I think there's also an introspective process that's a totally different process that's more unified with the sound experiences have volume, color experiences have brightness. That's how we get the pleasure is good. So there's two processes, one unreliable, one reliable. Trust the reliable one, mistrust the unreliable.
So just to make sure that I understand you, are you suggesting then that people don't genocide because it feels good? There's usually a different reason? Like, that there are a multitude of reasons that aren't like because people enjoy the feeling of it.
It's not about the immediate feeling. I'm just looking at or it's not about the feeling when you do the act. That's not really what I'm explaining here. I'm explaining why do people see one thing as right and another thing as wrong? And in general, or at least a lot of the time, I think it's because they have emotional responses to things that color their view of things. And then, if their emotional responses are full of hatred towards other people, their view will be colored so that they see the genocide as right. And otherwise, if those emotions do not color, maybe if other emotions color their experiences, where they're like very horrified by killing, then okay, they'll get to be the correct view that no, that's wrong. Committing genocide is wrong. But that process can be up or down just depending on what your society puts into you emotionally. And that's why I'm just kind of like, we're just trusting, our society to put the right emotions in us, and I don't want to trust that because I see so many going wrong. What I want to do is trust the thing that doesn't go wrong very often, which is this experiencing, just what your experiences are like. That's where I can see something that is reliable, trust that, not this other thing that just seems to be leading people into error a whole lot. I mean, some people don't get led into it, but a lot of people do. And severe error. So that's basically what the story is here. So that's what made me a utilitarian. This kind of look at the processes, that's empirical information. You can do psychology and study that. Get probabilities of truth for moral beliefs. That's an empirical way to figure out the moral facts. It requires non-circular ways of assessing the truth ratio. If you just assume your favorite moral theory and say, oh, this process generates the beliefs in my favorite theory, so that process must be reliable, then you will get a circular argument in favor of your favorite theory, because you've assumed that to defend the reliability of the process, and now you are basically concluding, the theory's reliable, but that was already an assumption. So I'm trying to do this in a non-circular way. So there's a bunch of ways to do that. you can look at the non-moral beliefs generated by the process. And if those turn out to be true a whole lot, then trust the moral beliefs too. And we can check the non-moral stuff usually more easily than we can check the moral stuff. So you just like get your ideas about the reliability from checking the non-moral stuff the process spits out, and then do the moral stuff the same way. There's also ways, I talked about disagreement. Without knowing who's right in some disagreements, you can know that at least one party is wrong. And that's what I'm using to sort of knock down the truth ratio of whatever we're doing that isn't experiencing pleasure. So third thing, there's evolutionary debunking arguments. There's a vast meta-ethics literature on these. If you know about it, I'm happy to say, yeah, those arguments are pretty good too, but I won't go into that detail because this is like the most worked on thing for like the last 18 years, and I'm sort of nervous about tiptoeing a little bit into it because it's just so vast. But yeah, people often think evolution just sets us up for believing what promotes fitness and not the truth, because that's what's going to survive. And if fitness and truth come apart, you'll just get fitness and not truth. So that's what people in that literature say. So that's that's another thing that could mess with truth ratios. So once you change credences in the moral proposition to in light of the truth ratios, you've basically taken a bunch of empirical information and figured out the moral truth using it. So that's how you cross the is-ought gap. There is a way, and this formula tells you how. Okay, so for that formula to work, reliability has to support inferences across different contexts. So same process, I saw some non-moral stuff, I figured out how often that was true. Suppose it was very often true, which I think is correct for this introspective knowing what your experiences are like. So in that case, if it's very often true, with the non-moral stuff, I'll just extend and believe the moral stuff coming out the same way is true. So that's, I think that's justified by, we've seen that this generally gets it right. Let's do it again on the moral stuff. Now, some people are wondering, when I say this, like, how can you go from the non-moral to the moral that way? But what I want to say is, in general, when you figure out that a process is reliable based on checking it with one kind of thing, it actually has ramifications for the other kinds of things. So like totally new things, you can just apply the process there too. So here are my two examples of this. Suppose your buddy Ed is known for just getting the wrong answers on stuff through wishful thinking a lot. He's gotten the wrong answer about whether his stocks will go up and which team will win and whether somebody loves him. He just keeps doing wishful thinking mistakes like that, and he knows it. And after a while, he's like, yeah, that wishful thinking just led me wrong about that, that, and that. And suppose he's also decided to get his head frozen after he dies with one of these cryonics companies that's like, oh, we'll freeze your head after you die and reanimate you in the future. But you've looked into the company, it's really dodgy. There's no way they're gonna get this done. They're probably just gonna throw the heads away in about 100 years or something like that. So you're just like, look, this is just wishful thinking, Ed. Don't believe that this is a good investment or a good use of your money. And suppose he says, well, I know wishful thinking led me wrong about investing in sports and romance, but it's never led me wrong about freezing my head. So maybe it works here. Okay, that's not good. That's wishful thinking. There's a reason it doesn't work, and it just doesn't work across different contexts. You should expect it not to be a way of finding the truth about freezing your head. So that's just an example of how it works across contexts in bad cases. Let me give you the good case, though. Galileo's telescope. Galileo sees the telescope works on land. You can basically see on Earth faraway things, and which ship is coming over the horizon, what's the land like over there from the ship? You can see all the faraway stuff on Earth. And then Galileo's interesting innovation is he's not just going to point that telescope at Earth, he's going to look at space. And here he discovers Earth's moon has geographical features. Jupiter has moons. The thing that worked on Earth is telling us this, and he trusts it. And then, concludes against the church, the planets are moving around in a way that fits a heliocentric model and not a geocentric model. Well, here's a kind of objection you could make against Galileo. Okay, Earth, the terrestrial and the heavenly are so different. How can you move from this works here to that works there? And in those days, they really thought the terrestrial and the heavenly were different in a way that's much stronger than we think today. Well, Galileo went ahead and did it and was right. And scientific discovery, I think, is like this often. You're going to use a method or a technique that worked for one kind of thing, apply it to another kind of thing, and you trust it on the new thing. I mean, maybe you trust it less than if you had 5 sources of confirmation, but like the first one has to do something to like move you. Otherwise you would keep going and following up. So yeah, you really, that's I think a good way of doing things that really is important for discovery. If you deny truth ratio induction across contexts, you're gonna lose a whole lot of stuff we do that helps us get it right. So that's basically my case for the reliability argument. What I'm going to be doing with that in this talk, the other argument is going to conclude pleasure is the only good thing, and the purpose of the reliability argument is just to defend this against intuitive counterexamples for the purpose of this talk. Basically, if someone says, hey look, I see you're a hedonist, but what do you say about this case where hedonism looks counterintuitive? What I'm going to say is, okay, yeah, it looks counterintuitive to me too, maybe, I know, unless I can make it come out intuitive in some way. So, like that intuition is just a product of an unreliable process, I think. Or I'll challenge you to tell me what reliable process generated that judgment. That's basically, and
so not introspection?
Yeah, well, yeah, right. So yeah, if you want to tell me that introspection generated this, I want to hear the causal story. Yeah, exactly. So that's how I'm sort of doing my moral epistemology here. And this is the sort of trick to defending hedonic utilitarianism against any objection. If you can basically say, hey, look, I feel it too, but that's all coming from an unreliable process. Why should we use this in figuring out the truth? I mean, that's, I think, the move we need. Okay, so that's the reliability argument. Let me go to this universality argument that is going to be the main focus of this talk. It gets, so the first one gave you a probabilistic conclusion, and this one will give you sort of a, that's why the percent sign is there. Pleasure is goodness is the conclusion. I'm abbreviating it as PIG because there's this famous objection to hedonism. This is a philosophy fit for swine, and I kind of, yeah, there's a time when I think I was at Bernard Nichols' house and having dinner with him and Susanna Siegel, and he asked me, so how do you respond to the objection that your hedonism is a philosophy fit for swine? And I said, oink. And that's basically what this view is. So yeah. Anyway, let me give you the universality argument that will be the focus of this talk. So the first thing, I'll be going into this in a lot more detail on the backside of the handout, yeah, the first thing is this analysis of goodness and other moral concepts in these hedonic terms. And here's how this goes. X is good if and only if X should please all possible moral perceivers. And how does this should please work? Here's what I mean by this should please. If something is good, everyone should regard it as something to hope for, something to be delighted by. So a good state of affairs, the world becoming a better place, is something worth hoping for. If there really is a way that the world can become a morally better place, if moral properties are out there in the world and we can sort of make the future instantiate them more, the feeling to have about that, I think, is hope, that it will become that way. And really, that's how all metaphysically possible minds should, or all metaphysically possible moral perceivers should feel about this. All metaphysically possible? You're asking, like, that's a lot, and it is. But I think morality demands universality. Like, if something is going to be moral value, there should be some way in which it's universal. It's not just valuable for this culture or valuable to this person. It is valuable in some way that anybody would be wrong if they sort of misrepresented. And it's got to be sort of in a unified way that all can see. There's got to be some kind of unity across everybody, where everybody is getting the same right answer or the same wrong answer, depending on what their answer is about morality. And that's what I think universality comes out to. Relativist things don't have to be this way. Right? I'm not a moral relativist. I'm trying to look for the universal stuff in morality, and that's what the point of this is. Right. So now we've got to figure out, like, what should please all possible moral perceivers. That's what universal moral value would be. So there's a should in there, and someone doing a naturalistic project like mine had better give you some account of should, had better reduce it to something within the naturalistic worldview, because science does not, invoke should particles, anywhere. So I've got to tell you what's really going on here in terms of things that you could see somewhere scientifically. Well, here's what I think there is that we can find in the ordinary world. There are some representations in minds that are accurate about the outside world. Accurate just means something like correspondence. You represent the world the way it is. And if your scientific views include something that gives rise to mental representation, and of course you've got reality, well, a match between mental representation and reality is accuracy. I'm doing this specifically for perception. It would be truth for belief. So if your belief matches reality, your belief is true. But often for perceptual states, people don't want to talk about truth so much, so I use accurate for that. Some people use veridical. It's interesting because accuracy comes in degrees. I think like a picture or a visual representation can be sort of more or less accurate, more or less true. Some people don't want to say that. So I just bring in accuracy here, and some people in philosophy might do that. That's the idea, but it's just correspondence either way. And that's how I'm reducing the should. So that normative term just becomes, well, when should you hope for a certain kind of future? Well, if it's if you're hoping for the future in the way that like a moral perceiver would, seeing it as a morally better future, well, why should you see it as a morally better future? Because then you're seeing it accurately. And this works the way perception generally works. The way you should see things is the accurate way to see things. Right now, I should perceive people in this room. If I don't perceive people in this room, my vision is not as it should be. And that's how should and accuracy relate for perceptual states. Correspondence is how your vision should present it should correspond with reality. If not, it's inaccurate, and that's why it isn't as it should be. It doesn't correspond. So correspondence norms give you a reduction base for this should that applies to feeling. Now, how do you get universal accuracy? So here's the most exciting move in the talk. How do you get beyond relativism and get a kind of accuracy so that something will match the feelings of hope, and specifically the pleasure in the hopes of all metaphysically possible perceivers? So how does that work? Well, here, the way I have that going, there's a way that you can get universally accurate representations. And that only happens when you have the accuracy conditions determined by sameness between the representing entity and the represented entity. So when is accuracy determined by sameness? Well, here's a good example of just one representational mode that is all about sameness. It's quotation. An accurate quotation has to be the same as the quoted words. That's how quotation works. And if you sort of ask, well, why is that the standard of accuracy for quotation? I don't really know what to say, because that is the sort of standard of accuracy. It wouldn't be quotation if that wasn't the sort of standard of accuracy. So there's a lot of things like this. The one that I'll get to that's really the most similar to what I'm doing here is empathy. If your friend is sad, the right way to feel for your friend is to be sad when you empathize. Then you've accurately represented how they feel in empathy. If you empathize and you feel happy, you just didn't represent how they felt. You misrepresented how they felt. So for some kinds of representations, matching displeasure with displeasure is actually what to do, and matching pleasure with pleasure is what to do. And I'm going to argue that in the end, morality turns out to be that kind of representation. And that's how pleasant feelings like hope for a better future should match the future. If there's pleasure in the future, it matches the pleasure in your hope. And that's why you should hope things go hedonically well for people. You should hope that people have pleasure and be horrified if they have severe displeasure. Then your perceptions match the world in a way that can be universal. So that's what the argument is, and that's why pleasure is goodness. That's what will give you this universal match that morality requires between your feelings and reality. The sort of historical thing I want to tell you about this that's kind of incredible is that all I'm doing here is basically putting together two ideas that have been around for 300 years, and nobody, as far as I know, has seen this. So Hutcheson's moral sense theory is the first idea. That basically is my hedonic analysis and should is accuracy. Francis Hutcheson, 1725 says, the pleasure in our sensible perceptions of any kind gives us our first idea of natural good or happiness, and then all objects which are apt to excite this pleasure are called immediately good. So that's sort of the hedonic analysis, pleasure, this sort of conceptual view that our first idea of natural good, the hedonic analysis is captured capturing, and then all objects which are apt to excite us pleasure are called immediately good. That's sort of describing a perceptual relation, just like, you know, you have the blue experience, you call it blue, you have the pleasure experience, you call it good. And that's just how the perception works here. So that's sort of the first two. And then Locke sort of finishes up the first one and gets you through the second one with his notion of primary quality representation. So primary qualities represent reality by resembling what they're about. This is Locke's view of perception. Why is my perception of a rectangle, when I look at this, accurate? Well, this is rectangular, and my visual field image is sort of rectangular, and the isomorphism between those, the resemblance, is what makes these perceptual experiences accurate about the world. So I'm basically taking the Lockean primary quality account of representation, attaching that to Hutcheson's moral sense theory, and hedonism immediately comes out of these two 300-year-old premises. And yeah, I was trying to figure out why did nobody do this, and I think I have my villain in the next line. Immanuel Kant just misled everybody about where you look for universal moral truth. He says, and how should laws of the determination of our will be taken as laws of the determination of the will of rational beings as such, and for ours only as rational beings, if they were merely empirical and did not have their origin completely a priori in pure but practical reason? He's telling you, look at reason and how it engages with the will. You're going to find the answer to like universality there. And he's completely wrong, and there was stuff on the books already from which you could build it, and he just got people not to look at it. So I really am a kind of a Kant hater because of this. Like, people think of him as a great moral philosopher. He's the reason we didn't figure it out, 150 years ago. He's basically just like the guy who just like tells you the wrong answer. And I have a hero that like found a right answer against Kant, and that's Albert Einstein. Kant would tell you, hey, it's a necessary truth that space and time, or space has a Euclidean structure, and Einstein empirically finds out it's not that way. So let me give you Einstein's statement of his empiricist epistemology in 1934. It can scarcely be denied that the supreme goal of all theory is to make the irreducible basic elements as simple and as few as possible, without having to surrender the adequate representation of a single datum of experience. And that's the epistemology that I work with. That's sort of my fundamental methodological principle. Explain all the data of experience with the simplest amount of stuff. The ontology that this gives us, and this is what Einstein finds for us, sort of a picture of reality as the spatiotemporal reality that we are in. And there's no need for other stuff like, well, the extra stuff, however you characterize it, that Kant wanted to add to that picture of reality to sort of explain the conditions of the possibility of experience. Just leave that stuff out. It gives you the wrong answers. It tells you space is going to be Euclidean. That just is not working here. So what Einstein gives us in the end is this ontology of things in a space-time that is a bit weirdly shaped, those are the things that explain the data of experience. So the Einsteinian ontology of stuff in space-time and the empiricist epistemology fit together rather nicely. We believe in all that stuff through science because it explains the data of experience. That's basically the story here. Now, I want to give you what is probably the best thing I have ever heard anyone say about philosophy. It's Einstein's endorsement of Hume. If you're looking for something to make the department you're in look good to people from the outside who are like, what's philosophy all about? This is the quote. Einstein, in 1915, thanks Hume, whose treatise of human nature I had studied avidly and with admiration shortly before discovering the theory of relativity. It is very possible that without these philosophical studies, I would not have arrived at the solution. So what he's telling you is, reading Hume, without that, maybe we don't get the theory of relativity. I mean, wow. Okay, that's like, we can basically coast on this for another century. We don't even need to do anything, and I think we've basically paid our bill as far as being a worthwhile discipline. But we shouldn't. We should try to do more stuff like this, like what Hume gave Einstein, and try to do more stuff like Einstein. And that's the methodology that I'm advocating here. Now, so I've tried to use Hume's psychological theory in this talk, but I also use Einstein's theory of relativity to show something interesting about qualia. So this is this paper that I have called Qualia Share Their Correlates Locations. And basically, you can use the theory of relativity to show that consciousness has to be located in our heads. I'll show you how you do that. So first of all, experience has to be in space somewhere because it's in time. and space-time is a unified thing. So that puts experience in space. It happens at a time. You are pleased at a particular time. That is the same time your brain is activated by whatever is stimulating it. So it's there at a time. At the same time that your brain is activated, that's when you feel the pleasure, or if you're looking out and seeing the sky and you have the bright experience of the sky, well, it's when your brain is activated by whatever's going on coming in through light. So, so we have a time at which consciousness happens. Now, here's what would happen in relativity. We know that consciousness has to be in space, exists in time. What would happen if consciousness were not in our heads, but were at some other place? So suppose my consciousness, even though my brain is here, was over where David is. So what would happen then? Well, suppose somebody went really fast, just as my brain was activated, towards David. Here's a funny thing about relativity. When you go really fast, things in front of you happen earlier and things behind you happen later. Your motion kind of like bends space and time around you, as people sometimes say. So things in front of you happen earlier, things behind you happen later. So suppose I'm having the experience of looking outside, my sort of bright pale blue experience is going on over there. Someone's running backward. Here's what would happen. The experience, because it's ahead of them, would be pulled earlier. And what's happening over here that causes the experience would be pulled later. My brain would be activated after the conscious experience it causes. The cause would come after the effect, and that's backward causation. That doesn't happen anywhere. The theory of relativity, though it allows weird stuff, it just rules that out. You are not going to get backwards causation. The whole world is held together by something that forbids backwards causation. So yeah, it turns out that consciousness basically has to be located right here, or you get violations of relativity, or violations of simultaneity with the brain and the conscious experience. So now this is important for me, because I want to get moral value into space-time as a naturalist, and if pleasure is in space-time because it's a conscious experience and its moral value, it's here. So this is just using Einstein to basically make pleasure's goodness in the right place for naturalists. Great. Now, this also answers a huge historical objection to a science of consciousness. So back in the 1920s, the psychologists were talking about how to set up their discipline. There was this guy Fernberger who thought that we should have a science of consciousness and a science of behavior, but the behaviorists were just sort of at some level too strong to allow this sensible proposal to go forward. This guy Carl Lashley rejected consciousness as a thing that could be studied because he's like, this is transcending time and space, it's just violating physical law. There were some people around there who suggested that consciousness had weird properties, and he was like, sort of like responding to them. And then he didn't also trust introspection, so we only got behaviorism as the main way psychology proceeded. This science of consciousness, I think if we had that 100 years ago, and that was allowed to go forward, we would just know tons of stuff now that would make it much easier for me to give this talk, because I would have a technical vocabulary from the science of consciousness for talking about everything I'm doing with consciousness. But that didn't happen, and I don't have the vocabulary, so we've got to cobble together what we can. I just feel like what Lashley did essentially here was just a giant crime against science. He basically destroyed a science we needed, and now we don't have it, and we need to rebuild it. And what happened as a result? Well, just to show you where philosophy went, because people didn't trust the science of consciousness, went full behaviorist. Norman Malcolm in 1959 is arguing that dreams are not experiences you have at night, because that would be conscious experiences just being there and not just being behavior. I mean, you just don't do the behavior while you're dreaming, usually. He says all dreams are tendencies to talk as if something happened at night when you wake up, because that's all behaviorism can accommodate. So we got these utter disasters, like in views about philosophy of mind, from people like that, because of Carl Lashley messing up science. Now here's the thing that's relevant to what I'm doing. I'm trying to build this, my hedonic analysis is in terms of feelings. The usual way people analyze moral judgment is in terms of action. Those formulations came up in the 40s and 50s in the behaviorist era, when you could just only talk about action. So I think what happened there is, ethics got just on the wrong track because of this behaviorist influence that prevented us from talking about feelings. So we have to repair that. So here's the kind of psychology I'm working with here. You take the behaviorism out of 20th century naturalism, put in a Humean psychology, get this 21st century naturalism, and here are the sort of principles here. Experience, this is early modern sort of Hume type stuff. Experiences cause beliefs, not the other way, ideas copy impressions. Desire is necessary for motivation and for inferences. Fleeting desires, this reason is the slave of the passions, is Hume's famous line. I defend this in my book, Humean Nature. Here's the two things that are going to be important for just some things I want to note that actually brought me to this place to discuss. So here's how I understand intentionality. So psychology, why do we talk about mental states being about things? Well, we need to talk that way to explain how behavior and our conscious experiences, which are made of these the elements of conscious experience, called qualia. So conscious experience and behavior are correlated in certain ways. And I don't think you're going to get a good explanation of that, or the best explanation you can get invokes intentional states that have a balance. So desires are for this, and when you see that you're going to get what you want, you are pleased by that. If you really want it and you get a chance to pursue it in some way, you know how you can get it, well, you'll be motivated to try to get it. So the motivation, the feelings, in order to get the best unified explanation of all this, you have to put in intentionality. They have to be about this. Mental states that are about things interlock in the right way to sort of explain the phenomena we see. Chemistry similarly uses valence, like sodium really wants to give away one electron, chlorine really wants to take one, and that's why it's NaCl rather than NaCl2 or Na2Cl or anything like that. You need to explain the data. Well, positing this gives you the most elegant explanation we have. We posit this. That's Einstein telling you to explain all the data as simply as possible. Also, the data of experience themselves, I think, consist of qualia in part, or at least qualia or background conditions for data. This is something that, so here's an argument I'm trying out. Philosophers of science, if you have any thoughts on this, I want to know what you think. Whenever I've looked through, what counts as data in philosophy of science, is there a general definition of data? People appeal to observation. And observation, well, what's that? I mean, if you put in conscious experience, you can give a great account of what observation is. But if you don't put in conscious experience, then what makes something an observation is everything that gets causally acted on, observing, but causally acts on it, like inanimate objects are doing observations. Well, no, the reason I think we shouldn't say that is they don't have consciousness to do observations with. So that's why I think to even give a sensible account of data, and you're not doing science without data, you need consciousness in the story to make things count as data. Anyway, so that's my big story for why intentionality is there. Can't do it without that. You can't do it without qualia either. You need both. Now, one of the big things I wanted to figure out was how do these relate? Because I'm going to be doing some stuff with intentionality and qualia and putting them together. What is intentionality for? Well, it's for that. The reason I think it's needed is partly because phenomenal states are there and they need to be explained. So Angela has defended a phenomenal intentionality thesis that gives phenomenal states a more important role in explaining why mental states are about stuff, why intentionality is there, than I do. But I do think that consciousness is important for it. If there were no consciousness, if we didn't have pleasant and unpleasant experiences of the world around us, of objects and all that, there just wouldn't be enough to explain to justify positing intentionality. But because there is, that's why we need to posit. So I have a sort of a weaker view of phenomenal intentionality. I say the phenomenal is necessary for intentionality, but I don't think that it sort of originates especially there rather than in behavior. It's just intentionality is what you bring in to make every causal relation that's going to explain the correlations work out. And here's sort of how I see those kinds of ways that things interact intentionally. So you can have an apple experience when you look at an apple. It's about apples because it generates apple beliefs which interact with apple desires. So you see the apple, you believe it's there. If you want to eat an apple, you'll go over there and put something in your mouth. You can also get apple imagination out of these things. So when you, if you're hungry and you're what do I want to eat? Oh, I want an apple. What you imagine will have some phenomenal similarity to what you see when you see the apple. Or at least you won't be imagining something, it'll be one of the things you might imagine. Seeing the apple, well, that's one of the things you might imagine. There's an interesting correlation there. when you tell, like, you can even, like, jokes like suppose you walk into, you really want an apple, but like your MacBook is all that's in the room and you're like, oh, wrong kind of apple. You can just like do all these, like apple just shows up in lots of different ways in the mind that require some kind of aboutness to make sense of them. Why is that a good joke? And if your Dell computer was over there, the joke wouldn't make any sense. Well, yeah, intentionality is explaining a lot of patterns in how our mind works, what's attended to. This is why I think like Angela's method is a good one for like figuring out the intentional content of stuff. Why does focusing on experience give you this? Well, the same things you focus on when you look at an experience are, well, those are the things that get absorbed into your beliefs, and that takes you down the network of Apple contents, because now you have no belief about Apple. Well, which things do you believe are there? Do you believe just that, like, okay, something green was there? Well, maybe you attend to it in a way that reveals its sort of appleness, because after all, you're hungry for apples. And that's going to sort of, you're not that interested in green things or things that have a little stem poking out. It's apples as such that you're interested in. So you see it as an apple because your attention is directed that way. And that's why, when you introspect on this, you can just pick out the content really well. Your attention is going the right way, because your attention is also what brings back a content to you. So that's why I think all of this works as well as it does, even on a picture that's a little bit different and doesn't give intentionality doesn't give the phenomenon such an important role. Okay, so that's the underlying psychology. Now let me take you through the universality argument one more time in a little bit more detail. That's just the backside of the clock. So I've given you this hedonic analysis. X is good if and only if X should please all metaphysically possible moral perceivers. There's problems with other analyses of moral concepts. The first one is just like, if you try to you think that like utilitarianism is true, and then you define the good as pleasure just to make a certain normative ethical theory that you think is true come out true. Well, lots of people aren't utilitarians, and you would have to say, if you define good in utilitarian terms, or define right in utilitarian terms, you'd have to say that everyone who's not a utilitarian is just like misunderstanding the definitions of the words, is like misapplying a concept in a language where they're a native speaker, and I just don't posit those errors. Those are not errors that people often make. People know what the words in their language mean, people use their concepts well, so I'm not going to do that. That's Moore's open question argument is basically the big objection to that. There's just an open question whether that's true, and people can go a lot of ways on it without making errors of definition. So my Humean psychology rules out the option of connecting this to action and saying the good is whatever all should be motivated to pursue, because I don't see that as an actual psychological relation that shows up in the human mind. This is what our book Humean Nature is sort of saying. You do not get the right kind of inferential connections between belief that something is right and motivation to do it. If you had those inferential connections, well, here's sort of the empirical refutation of belief is right to motivation to do it. It's the failure of gay conversion therapy. People often, thought it was right to have a different sexual orientation than they did. And they tried really hard to change their sexual orientation, and it just doesn't work. So belief about rightness is just not doing the thing. But what does happen in the mind is experience causes belief. That's all over the place. There's the mind is full of that. So I'm using something when I'm connecting experience to belief. I'm using something that's really there. And these people trying to connect belief to motivation are not using something that is actually in the structure of the human mind. So I think this creates all kinds of problems for the theories. You can get a relativist view where you don't say X is good for all possible moral perceivers, but if I'm doing morality, I need universality. Relativism is for beauty or something else like that. I think there's a lot of things that work the relativist way, but that's what we're doing. There's people who have, actually I'm running a bit slow, but people can ask me for my case against the Cornell realists, who are the closest people to me. They're also naturalistic moral realists. There is a kind of problem where they end up losing universality because they sort of take causal relations to us to determine what our moral judgments are about. So you make a moral judgment, whatever systematically causes that is its object, and it's going to determine what's right and good and so on. Well, different things are going to systematically cause moral judgments in different beings. You basically end up back in relativism. And I have a paper sort of arguing with Janice now about this, but we can go into that. So I'll give you my conceptual analysis here. So here you see good, right, virtuous, bad, wrong, vicious. It's about like what should please all and what should displease all, with pleasure basically making things look good to us. So this is sounding, probably a lot like the process I told you was unreliable, but let's run with it a bit. Emotional, responses making us see the world a certain way. This is how people usually do it. Let me at least accept the general conceptual analysis by which is explaining why their feelings of pleasure and displeasure, generate these beliefs. Well, if good is events that should please all and I'm pleased, I don't think I'm just like morally messed up in some kind of way. Well, yeah, that's probably good. I mean, it looks good to me. And if I don't think I'm messed up, well, then it's probably good, is the way that perception works. So you have a good, and here on the right-hand part of the column, I have like slightly richer emotions that involve pleasure and displeasure. So a thing you might feel about right action is pride, and a thing you might feel about wrong action that you do is guilt. And one's pleasant, pride is, and you feel pleasure about the things you see as good, virtuous, right. You admire the virtuous people, that's pleasant. But you might have hatred or contempt of vicious people, and that can be sort of an unpleasant emotion to stew in. And guilt is, if you took the displeasure out of guilt, I don't think it'd be guilt. I think these feelings are sort of essential to what the emotions are, the pleasure or displeasure. There's some really neat stuff you can do with this. The positive valence of good, right, virtuous correlates with the pleasure felt. The negative valence of bad, wrong, vicious correlates with the displeasure felt. So there's something systematic there. There's also, I'll leave this aside for Q&A if anyone wants to ask me about the good and the right. There's really neat ways to get the good connected to the right and the virtuous through relations between the feelings. And that's what is going on there. As far as how we understand should, that's just supposed to be a generic term for some normative relation. Some people in metaethics talk about fittingness, other people like to talk about reasons for feeling, whatever, however you're doing it, one way or the other, it works. But I don't care about which normative concept you use to plug in for the should, I care about my reduction. I'm going to reduce this to correspondence and specifically accuracy. So sensations and feelings, these are experiences that represent reality. They have a phenomenology, they cause a belief. They should be accurate. I mean, this is sensations and feelings both are this way. And accuracy is the standard for sensations. I'm just generalizing to experience as a whole and applying accuracy as this kind of like, norm for feeling. Experience that P tends to cause belief that P. If P, experience is accurate and belief is true. The difference between accuracy and truth, accuracy comes in degrees. Truth, people don't usually like to talk about degrees of truth, so I just like use accuracy for one when I need degrees in, and truth for the thing that's binary. Susanna Siegel talks about accuracy conditions of experience. So I'm going to use that term. And Cowan, who's over in Glasgow, talks about value appearances, sort of like when a future looks good, because you're hoping for it, and that's how hope makes it look to you. Well, that's more or less accurate. You can have degrees of accuracy there. Now, here's some interesting sort of case studies from delusions. Capgras delusion. This is a delusion where people think that their friends, family, and sometimes pets and livestock have been replaced by imposters. And what seems to be causing that is the pleasant feeling of familiarity when they see these people is somehow gone. So they see somebody and they don't have that and they think it's somebody else. And what this kind of alerted me to is that pleasure and displeasure play a ton of really high-level representational roles in the mind. Like personal identity is being tracked by pleasure. The pleasure of like feeling, oh, there's a familiar face. Pleasure could play that big a representational role. I mean, I'm talking about in my analysis a different representational role. But yeah, it's just like that stuff represents and shows us what the world is like. These moral feelings deserve to be counted as experiences. The should applying them should be the should that applies to feelings, accuracy. If experience couldn't cause belief, it wouldn't be like that. If feeling were simply willed, this is sort of like me trying to hook up the Kantian picture to feeling, yeah, accuracy wouldn't apply, some agential norm of what to will would apply, but that's not how it works. So this is a synthetic reduction. It's not supposed to be true by definition that should is correspondence. we can look at the minds of human beings and see, these feelings are, they form the belief insofar as you think they're accurate. But if you think they're inaccurate, then they don't. So here's how that should really seems to be working here, whereas on the motivation side, whatever should you apply to, I should have this sexual orientation, it's just not doing that. So we don't have the relations on the action side that we do on the perception side, and that's one of the things we actually have that operate the way the mind works. So synthetic reduction, again, this is empirical evidence comes in. So this is how I respond to Moore's open question argument. He basically says you should be a non-naturalist because that'll explain how people have different, moral judgments while being coherent. They're all believing that different non-natural properties are instantiated in the world. Rightness here, wrongness there, and disagreement comes up when I think this is right and you think it's wrong. And he says there's non-physical, non-natural stuff that is rightness and wrongness. I say, okay, you can use that to model everyone who's mistaken. Everyone who has a false moral belief, just model them the way you model everybody, G.E. Moore, with non-natural properties. Now, I'm a naturalist, so I don't believe in any non-natural properties. I'm denying that there's any of that, which then Moore is like, well, then you're not going to have any moral rightness and wrongness, and I'm there telling you. I can find it in the stuff of the natural world. And I'll show you the relation that does this. It's qualitative identity, or sameness, the relation that makes quotations accurate and empathy accurate. X makes pleasure accurate for all moral perceivers if only if X is pleasure. Sameness does the representing. So pictures, quotations, onomatopoeia, replicas, shape perception, and empathy. Perfect accuracy is being the same as the object. Accurate pictures look the same. That's what's depicted. Accurate quotations, same words. Accuracy in onomatopoeia. Vroom, vroom is the way the car vroomed across the parking lot. If you say the car meowed across the parking lot, it had better be a weird, weird car, or else you're giving inaccurate onomatopoeia. Replicas are accurate just by being the same. Shape perception is accurate if the shapes in one's visual field and before one are the same. That's Locke. Empathy is accurate if empathizers feel the same as those empathizers. So sameness in a lot of different modes is playing this fundamental representational role in determining accuracy. So, and this has been noted by Locke, Peirce. Schopenhauer thought compassion worked this way. Peirce had an idea of iconic representation that works this way. Neurath was designing museums with diagrams that looked like the museum, and he was like, yes, now everybody can understand what the museum looks like, because they'll see the diagram. It's kind of a mapster this way, basically. And he wanted it extended beyond maps, but he was like, yeah, this will give you universal perception of the way things are, but you don't need to know a specific symbol system, so it works that way. Margaret Cavendish, some people tell me, had this view of color, and here's what it'd be. Here's what it'd be if color worked this way. I don't think color works this way, but then what it'd be, you have a blue experience looking at my shirt. What would make that true? Again, color doesn't work this way, but here's what would make it true if it did. It'd be that my shirt has little minds in it that are having blue experiences, and you're visually empathizing with all the little minds that make up my shirt, and they're having blue experiences, and you have blue experience too, you accurately represent my shirt. Now, I don't think it's like that, but that's how it'd be to get this kind of accuracy. And color can be relative. I'm happy to be a relativist about color. If the aliens see the colors reversed, they get it right. So that's why I'm relativist about color. But I don't think if the aliens are in favor of torturing little baby aliens until they die, that they're getting it right. That's morality is universal and color isn't. So if goodness should please all and should reduces via accuracy to qualitative identity, pleasure is goodness. The other representation views will give you different accuracy conditions for different speakers or different perceivers, and you get relativism. Qualitative identity gives all pleasure in every hope, in every bit of admiration, in every bit of pride. It's going to have an accuracy condition involving pleasure, which is the same thing. And it doesn't matter what world you're in, sameness works the same way. Pleasure is the same as pleasure, and there's no world where that fails. So that sameness is what makes this work in every possible world and defeats relativism. In empathy and moral feeling, accuracy is the sameness of feeling between perceived and perceived. Qualitative identity makes empathy and moral feeling accurate, even if anyone else fails. So I'll just give you my quick example of how this works in empathy. Suppose everybody around, suppose your whole world, except for one instance, is full of people who, whenever someone's sad, they feel happy for them when they empathize. And whenever someone's happy, people feel sad for them when they empathize. Okay, suppose there's one person in this world who's just really sad. And you for the only time this ever happens in the world, you empathize and feel sad for the person who's sad. I think your representation is accurate, while everyone else is inaccurate. And that shows that relativism isn't going on here, and qualitative identity can sort of break through relativism. Because what everybody else thinks does not determine it, or what everyone else is doing doesn't determine it. Sameness just beats what everyone else is doing and determines the right answer. And if you have that for morality, you won't get moral relativism. You'll just get pleasure is universal moral value, because it matches the pleasure of your hope. So you should, at the end of this talk, be given a juicy, crazy utilitarian consequence. If I haven't done that, I kind of haven't done my job as a utilitarian. So I'll tell you what this convinced me about the destiny of humanity. So the thing to hope for is, we have pleasure and hope. A future full of pleasure, is the future to hope for. So what I think the sort of destiny of humanity, the greatest thing we could achieve is to just fill space-time with as much pleasure as possible, because then that would be the future to hope for the most. That would be the best possible future. So how do you do this? Well, suppose we're stuck with the human brain structures in generating pleasure. Well, we need to genetically modify plants to put in human brain structures. So maybe you take a plant that generates some psychoactive chemical that makes people feel happy, and just genetically modify it so you have the human brain structures to feel pleasure in response to that chemical. So we could grow pleasure plants, terraform planets for them, and just grow giant fields of pleasure plants all across the galaxy. We would be the gardeners of the galaxy, filling everything in space-time with just as much pleasure as we could. And then we would be sort of the ancestral gods of a large region of the universe, creating heavens, which, we sort of look back at the, gods that other people believe in, and are like, there's a problem of evil for you guys. Why didn't the gods make it good? Well, we can be the great gods for the future, and basically set up humanity to just fill space-time with pleasure, create heavens in space-time, be its ancestral gods, and that, I think, is our great moral destiny. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Neil. We have half an hour for questions, but we can also go a little bit over after the half hour. Everybody should feel free to leave after the half hour. Neil has graciously agreed to stay on.
Yeah,
and
I'll
answer
stay
all
as
the
long as you want to
questions.
keep me.
Yeah.
I take the first one, maybe a naive question. So I have a question about your hedonic analysis.
Yes.
Because you said that it's good if only it should please all the possible for position. I'm wondering, this biconditional is so demanding, because for me it seems to me that the X might be too thin to have any power of guidance of our practical actions. I mean, hoping might be good, might be good, and having delightfulness might be good, but is there any more detailed things that could be added, like hoping that, for example, hoping that Trump will be the next president is good or not? Because it seems very relative to different moral agents, right?
Okay, good. So here's how I want to get past the relativism to sort of tell you what my conclusions say about this. Okay, so let's take the US election. If one outcome in the election will generate more pleasure than another outcome for all the beings, that's the one to hope for, because then the pleasure in your hope matches the outcome. So my own view is that there will be more pleasure for the beings that exist if Kamala Harris becomes president, wins the election. And that's why I hope she will win. Then my feelings match hedonically the state of the future. Now, I could be mistaken about this. I don't think I am, obviously, but if it turns out that Trump actually will create the most pleasure for all the beings, then his victory is the one to hope for. So that gives you something objective in the world for pleasure levels to match your feelings to. And there are people who will not do it this way. Obviously, the Trump supporters, they aren't doing it this way. Maybe some of them are doing pleasure calculations, but probably a lot of them are just doing other things that involve some other moral theory. If it turns out that the Harris victory generates more pleasure, well, they are hedonically in their feelings mismatched with the outcomes, and that's why they're wrong.
So truth maker is just the fact or the
Yes.
future, right?
Yes, the future pleasure that exists, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, the question.
I want to follow up on the kind of annoying, obvious questions.
Go ahead, yeah.
And talk about situations in which, human relationships are complicated. And, it can often be the case that, that something that brings pleasure to one person doesn't to the other. And something that I've always found attractive about Kantian theory is that it sort of overrides that. It says, well, no, rightness goes beyond, something that might, make you happy. So any of those sort of standard, lying to the king situations or whatever. But what do you do about that? Where it's not, I'm thinking it's not necessarily wrong either way. It's just that maybe me getting home faster by driving in the left-hand lane means that you get home slower or whatever.
Right. Yeah, just for practical implications, one of the things to bear in mind, I'm defending sort of pleasure fundamentalism. It's sort of the fundamental goodness is pleasure and badness is displeasure. Now, there might be, human, customs and social relations where, it's best not to try to take that into account because, what we are doing, sort of the rules for living in a complicated society, though they may be derived from these fundamental facts, trying to do the derivation too quickly without sort of taking into account everything, in social dynamics, might get you the wrong answer. So that's why, even though this is the case, so John Stuart Mill, I think, was someone who was really good about seeing this. His defense of liberalism basically allows that, there might be one-off situations where, torturing this guy for information, is the way to get the information to make people overall happy or diffuse the ticking time bomb or whatever. But the way I sort of feel about that is, no, you should really have a hard no torturing rule because on balance, overall, torture just fills the judicial system with bad information and it also causes extreme pain to people. That's just, so much disutility is gonna happen. So it's good to have a no torturing rule and follow it just all the way. And certainly we'll mess up, sometimes a ticking time bomb will blow up, but it's better than what happens otherwise, where we just lose the integrity of our judicial system and people are being tortured. So that's kind of how I see rules in general like that. I'm giving you the fundamentals, but that will often support policies in the real world that don't take pleasure into that much account and don't try to count it, because we could get the wrong answer if we try to count in the real world for all kinds of contingent reasons.
I also have a question about the concept of good, right, and virtuous.
Yes.
You talk about good is that the events that pleasant to all, and right pleasant actions to all, and also virtues are pleasant traits to all, and the bad, wrong, evil are the accordingly unpleasant things, right? So I'm just wondering, what if someone has mixed feelings? In that we can imagine a situation, for example, a case of courage, in which a soldier may on the one hand feel fair, and on the other hand, he wants to pursue the nobility to protect his country. So in that sense, he has the feelings that you defined as pleasant, and also has feelings you defined as unpleasant. So it seems that it is difficult to tell whether this kind of action or things is good or bad, virtuous or vicious.
Great. Let me take this example, because this is very good, I think, for explaining how this analysis will sort of work in complex cases. So here's what I'm going to sort of analogize this to. You can see objects that have multiple colors, like this thing over here is blue over here and black over here. And you should see both to sort of fully represent its colors, and also the silver over here. So there's many different colors on the thing. So I think in that soldier situation, the soldier could be seeing everything right. There is moral value in the soldier's own life. But there is also moral value in defending the innocent. So both perceptions Suppose the soldier bravely decides to, courageously, keep fighting and is, displeased by what this is doing for his life, but also, if the soldier ran away, there'd be a lot of shame and a lot of, if you ever think about what will happen to the people behind you, the innocent people who you're defending, well, it could be very bad for them. So horror at their, what will happen to them would be, just right there. So mixed feelings will happen either way, in either decision. And in this case, they can actually, both sides can represent, accurately. Because there is something good about courageously defending. It supports the lives of the innocent people who you're supporting, who you're defending. And there's also something bad, it puts you at risk. So I can accept that in complex cases where you feel both sides are accurate, because the situation is complicated. And that's how I want to understand a lot of complicated situations where we can have mixed feelings, and the mixed feelings are actually just justified by the overall texture of the situation. Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to go back to your should is correspondence claim.
Yeah.
And in particular, the sort of basis of it seems to come from sensation.
Yes.
Sensations should be accurate.
Yes.
So in the Debates in Cognitive Science volume, I wrote a paper called Is the Aim of Perception to Provide Accurate Representations the Case for the No Side?
Yes. As the question mark titles are.
Right? So there's lots of instances. What perceptual systems are for is to get creatures around in the world long enough to reproduce. That's what evolution cares about.
Yeah.
Often, accurate representations will do that. Often, they won't. There's better ways to do it.
Yeah.
So, Kathleen Akins gave us a nice story about narcissistic sensory systems, and they massively over-exaggerate things. She was particularly looking at thermoreceptors. They aren't thermometers.
Yeah.
They're not measuring temperature. They're worrying about our temperature needs. And so a small change in temperature can have a massive reaction to us if we're already near the tolerance limits. Lots of instances about, now you weren't sure about color, I don't think, in any case, but red and green are very close in the spectrum. They're specifically opposed to each other in the way the visual system works. And lots and lots of instances like this in lots of different modalities of sensation. So I'm not saying it's never a good thing to have accurate representations, but there are times where misrepresenting makes an easier, faster judgment. You see contrast, it just helps you move around. So I just wonder how that plays into the presuppositions.
Yeah.
It just felt fast to me.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm going fast because there's a lot. But
Yeah.
That's something that I gotta, argue at some length for. Yeah. And let me try to deal with these cases. I don't totally know them, but I'll try to look up the paper and see if I can deal with it, and respond to it when I'm writing. I have my email on there. If you want to email it to me, please do, because that'll be the easiest way for me to get it. Yeah. Don't feel shy about that. Yeah, because I need that. Yeah. Right. So in the cases as I was hearing them, and tell me if something is mistaken here, it seemed that there was just it's important for the organism to get accuracy within a very narrow range. Because if I was getting the thermoregulation thing, there's temperatures that just don't matter, and representing those doesn't really matter for any purposes. But, if you're just mixed up within the range that's important for survival, that's going to be a clear case of inaccuracy. And red and green, I have a bad color vision on those things, and I've always thought I was inaccurate. As soon as I found out that I had bad red-green color vision. I have cool glasses to try to, and I think I repaired some of my vision. I can tell people. Yeah, anyway, what to say about all this? Right, so I think in all those cases, there's sort of a limited kind of accuracy that's important. So even in those cases, it's showing up. Now, what kind of accuracy is important? Do you need accuracy about the whole color spectrum, or about the whole temperature spectrum, or just a little bit? Well, that's where I see the practical things you're talking about in terms of survival and all that, sort of constraining everything very heavily. But within that constrained space, then accuracy matters, I think. And obviously, there's so much world and so little we see. I am never going to be saying, we see it all! But about what we see, about the little bit we see, accuracy matters. So that's the way I generally want to go.
Yeah, so I'll send you the paper. Because
Great.
I think action sometimes misrepresents to highlight contrasts much more strongly than actually exist in the world to make it easier for us to act.
Great. So if this is action that's doing that kind of role, that's a different thing that I've got here. So I may be able to concede that to you because I'm talking about experiential representations. And if things get so actiony that they're outside of, then yeah, I might be able to give you that. Yeah.
Right, so
Yeah.
for what it's worth, I'm pretty sympathetic to the embodied cognition views where things don't clearly,
Oh, I
I
see,
have
I
this,
see.
and then I
Great.
see, then I think, then I act. That's a lot blurrier too, but.
Interesting. Yeah, we should talk about this more.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit about this idea of introspection, that pleasure is good.
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, lots of utilitarians who've thought about, pleasure, have introspected different things about its value. So one thought is, Mill says, when you think about it, there's two kinds of pleasure. And some pleasures are better than others. And that's a kind of introspective judgment for which he gives a kind of empirical argument. Right? I mean, he just says, look, you take these two, the pleasures of mere sensation, he says, and then these kind of more, intellectual, pleasures associated with, kind of moral feelings, that kind of thing. That looks like a kind of introspective judgment, but I take it from the thing you said at the very end here, that what you really cared about is any pleasure, and the more quantity of it, the better.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe you could just say a little bit about,
Yeah.
because I think it's introspection that's doing the work, so maybe you think that it doesn't, in which case maybe we disagree about what that is.
Yeah.
But also, it's not clear that introspection tells me whether quantity or quality is the thing, is the dimension of pleasure that matters more.
Right. Okay, yeah. Right. So, yeah, I don't really know what Mill would think of as the causal story, but behind the higher lower distinction in
He's
pleasures.
kind of an empiricist, so he's in your camp.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
He is. But exactly which empirical, because there's a lot of empirical processes, which one is giving us that? So he does connect it in some places to the opinions of the majority or something like that. Maybe that's a roundabout way to get to introspection, but maybe that's the foundations of it. I haven't really looked at this. One of those. But whatever he says he's doing, I don't think he got the higher or lower thing from introspection. I think there's a different causal process that I think the story here is that he's writing during the Victorian period, and you cannot go around telling people just simple Benthamite hedonism and get anywhere at that time. He's probably internally a little bit Victorian himself, and he's just a little bit shocked by the implication that the lower pleasures are like what I go for in the end. Just create the lower pleasures for a bunch of genetically modified plants. He just does not want to go for this, and this is not an acceptable conclusion to a lot of people in that period.
Right, so my worry about this response, which I knew you would say, is just, it has the same flavor as the one that says, well, here's my favorite moral theory, whatever generates that is the reliable thing.
Yeah.
And so, but you get a kind of circularity. So I'm worried that you've got this circularity there.
So let me give you sort of a second response to this, why I don't think it's introspection from introspectionist point of view. So I just don't think that this higher or lower pleasure distinction is going to be useful in characterizing our phenomenology that much. Really what you might get is pleasures we approve of and pleasures we disapprove of. And you can get that, but that's not a phenomenal, that's not in the one bit of pleasure, the approvableness. No, that's you have a second attitude towards that pleasure, approval towards it. And that's what I think is the psychological thing that can generate this, approval towards pleasures. But that's not introspecting that pleasure itself. That's having a second attitude that creates some extra stuff on top of what was there first, and now you're introspecting into that. So something has happened here that's just created a big error.
Okay, so I thought you might say that too. So this is like the charge that says, Mill, you can't have this distinction consistent with hedonism because in order to have it, you've got to suppose there's some other value that tells you which of the pleasures is higher, lower, etc. And then you want to say, okay, that's the right criticism of Mill, and that you can piggyback on for the idea that that has a source outside of
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
right.
so the response, of course, to this worry is just like in themselves, certain pleasures seem, upon introspection, to be better as a kind, right? So
Right.
there's an argument here. That's a
Yeah,
dispute, but
yeah,
okay.
I've got to get
Yeah.
into the psychology of this
Yeah.
to really
Okay.
slice this up, and what I need to say is like, yeah, this wasn't just pure introspection, it was introspecting after you've sort of added an extra feeling that, yeah, so that's my secret there, yeah.
Mike?
You skipped me there.
Go ahead.
So I have a question regarding why we should be appraising morality with empathy specifically, because if I want to know if that wall is purple, I know to look at a certain part, or on what you're saying, a certain part of my visual field is purple, other parts are white, but I know from the purple bit that it is purple, right? But if someone is, committing some kind of war crime, for example, they might have an explicitly empathetic part of them that feels extreme displeasure at it, but an element of patriotism or whatever that feels pleasure, and so they both have the same. They're both operating on the same scales, but why should I be looking at the empathic part?
Yeah. So I think the reliability argument in the beginning is really, going to sort of help me a little bit with that. What that's going to do is, so whatever's making them think they're justified in committing this war crime, I think that's going to be something that comes from an unreliable process of belief formation, and that's what my broad unreliability claim is going to suggest. And the examples that I was sort of using to motivate that, the genocide examples, really do kind of stick to the war crime case pretty well, because in some cases that will be the nature of the war crime. So that's one thing I have over there. But to get into the universality argument as well, so suppose the thing that they judge to be right is, let's say just torturing and killing this guy. Let's have that be the nature of the war. So here's just a way to see, within the terms of the universality argument, which are sort of weird terms for assessing this, but I'll show you how you can sort of generate a problem for that. So, okay, this guy is having like a pleasant feeling towards this torture and murder, right, which is actually full of displeasure. That pleasant feeling towards that, what kind of representational relation is involved in this pleasant feeling representing this displeasure-causing action that could generate universal accuracy? Well, here's a way you could do it. If you're G.E. Moore, you could attach a non-natural property that makes experiences, pleasant experiences, accurate about that. That's your non-naturalist way of doing it. But if you're a naturalist, you can't do that. So what account of representation do we have that would make this representation universally accurate? I don't think there is one. You can do relativist stuff, but that's not universal. You can even do externalist stuff. This is the Genestable thing that I can get into if you want, but even that's not going to get you universality. So it's basically that there's no way to set that up as a universal thing. So in some ways, this is going to sound very Kantian. I have a universalizability test. Could the representation relation involved be universal? But that universalizability test is found exactly where Kant told us it was not going to be.
So the empathy is the only thing that everyone could agree on?
Yeah, basically, it's the only thing for which, if there's displeasure in this case for the poor victim out there, if there's displeasure in that case, how could all metaphysically possible beings represent that displeasure in the same way, accurately? Well, the only thing I have is identity. If they have displeasure towards the displeasure, if that's what makes for accuracy, that can be the same for them all. Because sameness is sameness in all worlds, and it works the same way. Whereas causation is different in different worlds, and relativist stuff is different in different societies. So,
In the back.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the talk. So maybe my question follows on nicely from the answer you just given, because I would like to kind of push you a little bit more on the universality requirement. specifically because it seems to me that a lot of the disagreements we have about morality, leaving aside things like the genocide case, are actually about highly relativized aspects of morality. So I'm Australian. In the Australian case, for example, we have a lot of discussion about how exactly we ought to, or if we ought to recognize like cultural rights for Indigenous Australians. And part of the thing that seems to be going on is that from a settler perspective, we're unable to empathize with either the pleasure or displeasure that comes from the provision of those rights, and not only that, they are not the kind of things that ought to be universally applied. Like, it's not just that my framework lacks a perspective, or the settler framework lacks a perspective with which that can be represented in a way that's like morally or metaphysically tractable. It's also the kind of thing that is not going to give me pleasure or displeasure if they're the kind of rights that are granted to me. And it seems like actually a lot of the debates we have are more about these relative aspects of morality. And so I wonder whether this is just simply far too demanding for, in fact, most of the moral disagreements that we have.
Great, yeah. So I think, that criticism I will concede to some large extent. And I think some of the previous comments about like what I was saying, this is just about the fundamental stuff. You don't use fundamental physics to build bridges. You use like Newtonian mechanics, which works, in our world pretty well. And so yeah, we do that. So that's kind of how I see this. I've given you the fundamental stuff. Maybe, for some applications, you actually want to get all the way to the fundamentals. And I think if you're just trying to get the shape of the good destiny for humanity, we don't really have much to go on. That's all in the future. We don't know exactly what happens between now and then. So I'm just sort of giving you a shape for that destiny. But for other stuff, we just have a lot of understanding about like causal consequences of organizing politics one way or another. And for what we do there, I mean, that's how I think we can get to the fundamentals in the end. We see like, okay, what kind of political structures for recognizing, after effects of settler colonialism, especially like, I mean, the way Australia did it plays into some genocide stories rather horrendously. Yeah. So, I might even use those examples in what I'm writing about this. If we, what we need to do, I think, there is sort of consult sort of more practical folks who are like political scientists and sociologists and people who've, lived with the Aboriginal community and stuff like that, or the Aboriginal community themselves can tell us about this. And we'll just kind of see what's going on, all around, from these people, and then figure out sort of a practical way forward. We can consider things like, they set it up this way over there, and they ran into this weird bad legal consequence where law couldn't apply properly or something, and then we'll be like, don't do it that way. So that's kind of how this applies in the end. It's supposed to support some general consequentialism that can be applied with the help of political scientists and so on. That's kind of for political stuff. I'll just tell you what I'm doing, because I do some political philosophy too. One of the big things is, I think like, the reason to support democracy isn't any of these Rawlsian public reason things. It's basically, I have this like big list of death tolls from genocides and famines, and all the top places with the most horrendous death toll are non-democracies. That's why you set up democracy, because if you don't, you're at risk for disasters, So that's what I want to do consequentialist-wise, and the thing this basically does within political philosophy is this is much more in favor of, when you're trying to set up your political system, look what usually happens if people set it up that way, versus doing the public reason thing, which I don't understand the foundations of.
Wayne.
It's very interesting talk, and there's a lot of moving parts. I'm just trying to understand the overall structure. And what I want to understand is, how does the phenomenon of people taking pleasure in someone else's displeasure, or in someone else's pain, fit in? So that's not an example of someone it's in some sense the opposite of empathy. Like, you're not misrepresenting the other person's feelings. You know they're feeling bad, and you're taking pleasure in that. So how does that fit? I assume that the judgment on that is, you share the judgment that there's something wrong with that, and on your account, why is that wrong?
Great.
Or if it is.
So I think, in a lot of cases, it's going to be wrong.
Okay.
In general, one should not do this. I can get some cases where a certain kind of schadenfreude ends up being an accurate moral perception of reality. These cases, I don't know how common they are, but let me give you the sort of the structure of this case. And this goes back to sort of your mixed example of the soldier, you know, where there's two different feelings. So basically, I want to answer it that kind of way.
I'm not agree with those cases. Like the cases where it is clearly wrong.
Oh,
Why is
okay,
it wrong?
okay.
Yeah. So you know, someone takes pleasure in torturing innocents who do not in any sense deserve it.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, yeah. And suppose they. I mean,
why is that wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it?
Just to make sure this fits within my account, are they making a moral judgment that it's right to do so, or should I put that in or not?
Just leave it. I don't know if they're making a moral judgment or not. I want to know what your moral judgment about that is.
Oh, my moral judgment about that. Yeah. Well,
If I'm taking pleasure in someone else's pain, and it is someone who told me complete innocent, am I doing something wrong?
Good, yeah. So, okay, good, yeah. In the vast majority of cases, I'll say yes, because what usually is happening is the amount of pleasure you're taking is less than the amount of pain you're causing. So in general, for the case, but let me deal with the other cases.
Okay, so I want to be clear that this is, I thought maybe this may be the consequence of this, of your view, that it is an empirical fact about whether the pain being caused is greater than the pleasure. So if in fact there are aliens out there who really enjoy torturing humans, and their pleasure is greater than the pain, then they're not doing anything wrong. In torture.
So here's what your scenario is isomorphic to. Suppose
is that the judgment? Is that the consequence? That if there were these aliens out there and they gain a lot of pleasure from torturing
right. If it really is
then they wouldn't be doing anything wrong.
They'd be doing something right. Yeah, this would be Well, I mean, really, what they should do is just get into VR of tortured humans and like leave us alone. So like, I mean, we could just set them up that way. Experience machine all the sadists. That's basically what I would do.
Yeah, they wouldn't enjoy that.
But just to get you like,
it's an imagined scenario, so we can imagine a scenario in which they only get pleasure.
You can imagine it very well, because here's a big problem we have. Our degree of we haven't experienced pleasure like this. Whatever it is, it's a lot more because it's gotta overcome the torture displeasure. And certainly, and it's good that you made it aliens, because I don't think humans have a capacity for like pleasure levels that high. So you're talking about unimaginable pleasure levels. So you've given me a scenario that just like, our sort of ability to like conceive of the case is for certain reasons not going to be very accurate. So that's why I think we have these judgments. But I'll tell you, when you scale it down to pleasure levels we can understand what it looks like. You know, I'm okay with like, if you play a prank on somebody that annoys them a little bit, but is just completely hilarious and doesn't have any other bad consequences, I am in favor of pranks. This is basically isomorphic to a prank, but just with like, a whole big increase that beyond the level that we can properly conceive of. That's the case you've given. So I just don't understand. I mean, really, what you've done here is jumped the pleasure above any level we can see, and now we have to judge it. And that's why I think our judgments come out the way they do. If we could fully comprehend all that pleasure and the torture, I think our judgments would be different. And it's just that we can't visualize the scenario properly.
Dimitri, do you have a follow-up on this question?
Just follow up. So what if you replace the sci-fi scenario with a, Harrison scenario? Maybe thousands of horrible people taking turns touching one happy victim. And not only the act of torture, but also the anesthesia, torturing that victim. Gives them a little pleasure.
You have found basically the consequence of my theory that I'm the least happy about. In that case, I have to say that's okay. Though, in any situation in the future, you'll just be able to VR up the sadists. But sadly, in a situation where we're so low tech that we can't do that, I end up having that result. But the thing is that, if you want to tell me, why, how reliable processes got you the idea that I have the wrong answer to this, I want to hear your story.
Sorry, would it be the right thing to do if some people have very bad desires and nothing but torture and violence?
That would be the right thing to do, let them do it. Right. But I mean, tell me where I'm wrong in terms of reliable processes. That's what I want to ask you. If you have a story about where I've let an unreliable process into my judgment, let me know. Because otherwise, I mean, the reliable processes are telling us all of this. I mean, what do you have against that? Or, I mean, if you want to like go for some kind of epistemology that like is going to run against the reliable processes, I want to know what you're doing. And how that can be justified given what we have here. So yeah, this is one of those cases where like, yeah, the foundational assumptions get me to a conclusion that I think is horrible, but like the foundational assumptions are just strong enough that I got to accept the result. And if you can tell me where I'm wrong, tell me.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is maybe a very naive question, but I have a question about qualitative identity. You say that accurate quotations have the same words as the original, and I was wondering what is, as a case study, what is the situation when you have a quotation that's been translated through multiple languages?
Yeah. This is a bit tricky. So how you do that, I think sameness of meaning is what you're going for in those cases. So that's sort of our fallback for translinguistic quotations is same meaning.
So how do you conceive that though? Because it seems that there's a question here about accuracy that I don't think would just apply to language between form and content.
Yes. So let me just do the pictures example, because so quotation is really nice for me when it's the same language, but when it's the translinguistic case, then it looks more like pictures. So let me tell you what's going on with sameness in pictures. So accurate pictures look the same as what's depicted, but they're not the same in all respects. I mean, a picture of you doesn't have to be three-dimensional like you are. There's just there's a respect in which there is sameness, how they look. It's a pretty rich respect, but it's not everything. So meaning, similarly for like quotations across languages, we just get that as our standard of accuracy there, and it's sameness of meaning. Now, meaning is a pretty rich, complicated thing. There's a lot going on in it, and you get degrees of accuracy in this, because across languages you won't get exact accuracy, but accuracy admits of degrees. So that's why it's a fine notion for handling translinguistic quotations. You can ask questions of like, if you're translating something, you can ask, is this an accurate translation? Well, then it'd be more accurate, so let's translate it that way. So I think that actually is, I mean, it's not, obviously, if you're speaking the same language as somebody, yeah, that's how you should represent the quotation, because you'll get like a deep kind of accuracy, even deeper kind of accuracy there, but you will get a lot of accuracy through the meaning stuff, sameness of meaning, the qualitative identity. The qualitative identity of meaning is what you're looking for in the translinguistic case.
Wouldn't you have degrees of accuracy for empathy then as well?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, you can't have exactly, I mean, you might not have exactly the same feeling as the other person, but I mean, a perfect empathizer might have the exact feeling. That'd be just like awesome. But hey, if you can just get a little bit in the right direction, you're doing better than somebody who goes in the wrong direction. So yeah, degrees are all over every kind of accuracy I'm talking about. I mean, replicas, nothing's ever exactly accurate, but you know, degrees are everywhere. Yeah.
You said near the end of your talk that say there was an alien who had a different kind of moral sense where they see pleasure and they think that that's bad. Mm-hmm. And you said that that would be like a wrong belief.
Yeah.
Does that not go against your X is good if X pleases all moral perceivers? Like, would those aliens not be a moral perceiver?
They have taken pleasure in something that should not. There's no story about how that should please all moral perceivers. Why should all moral perceivers be pleased by displeasure? I just don't know why. I mean, I can tell you a story why they should be pleased by pleasure, because that follows the qualitative identity standard of representation. But I don't know what kind of standard of representation we've ever found around us that runs on displeasure yet.
I guess that would mean that if those aliens existed, then that would mean that pleasure isn't necessarily good because some observers are disagreeing.
Look at the should. There's a should in that statement that's important. It's not does. So if it was does, if X does please, that's why I don't use that, because then your example would be a counterexample. Should avoids that. I gotta say, that alien is not seeing things as they should. So I can say that. And the matching is what makes things as they should be. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm just looking at what you talked about at the end, sort of this ethical dream for the future, and it reminded me of there's something Hume says in the dialogues on natural religion, and he sort of says, if God was really omnipotent and omnibeneficent, he would have just made us sort of do the things like anything that makes us healthy would just feel super pleasurable, right? And it just, I think the point of that too is like Hume's pointing out this sort of disparity and imbalance where like there's a lot of pain, and then we have a like sort of less familiarity with pleasure in general. And like, just because kind of Humean psychology is important here in your view, I don't know, I'm not sure if it opens up sort of kind of hurts the reliability process, because it's like if we're sort of less acquainted with pleasure, because we have there's more accounts of pain up there, right? And if I'm understanding right, pleasure is sort of out there in the world. There's sort of a realism about it,
exactly.
And that you can know empirically. It sort of it hurts our kind of reliability process if we're just less kind of familiar in general of if there's kind of this imbalance.
I see. Yeah. So right. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to be unreliable on my view. All over the place you get unreliability. I mean, that's why I'm kind of limiting our moral reliability to like this process where we know what our experiences are like. So yeah, I'm very happy with the consequence that a lot of the things we're doing are massively unreliable about evaluating facts. I think that's at bottom what I end up seeing here.
So I have a question about should is accuracy. Okay, so you're thinking of X pleasing Y is like Y having a certain representational state, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so what exactly is the content of that state?
So why? So
X pleases Y. What's the content of Y's state?
And
what's the attitude? Is there a pleasure attitude, or is pleasure just in the content?
So X pleases Y.
Yeah.
So X is just a state of affairs or something like that. What is the content of X? X, I guess.
So what is the content of Y's state of pleasure?
Y's state of pleasure. Oh, Y's state of pleasure. Yeah.
You're thinking of pleasure as like representational, right?
Yes. So it's going to be X is good. Yeah, pleasure makes you see things as good. Yeah, that's the idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when X pleases Y, Y represents
X is good.
X is good.
Yeah.
That is the content of the pleasure.
Yes.
Okay. And that is in the should is accuracy premise.
Yes, I think so, because that's going to be what makes it accurate. So that's the content. Yeah, because it's true. Yeah. What would make something true is the content. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry that it should is accuracy and should is correspondence back and front. I've changed it to accuracy. So yeah.
Sorry. So now I'm confused.
Okay.
So then when something good happens, and people are experiencing pleasure, they're all representing goodness.
Yeah, they're all representing.
Okay, so everything is representation of goodness.
Yeah. All these pleasures are. Yeah.
Okay, so it's okay. So is it so? Okay, so it sounds more like you're giving an account of pleasure in terms of goodness.
Okay. Well, so one of the things about contents here, if I understand correctly, are we individuating content so that like you have the
pleasure is a representation of goodness.
Pleasure is a representation of goodness.
Okay.
Yes. Now, if I'm a pleasure-goodness identity theorist, so how do I talk about content here? You know about this better than me. So like, if I'm an H2O water identity theorist, should I say that when I'm looking at those bottles back there, I'm representing, I can say I'm representing H2O and I'm representing water. And should I also say of the medieval guy who doesn't know that water is H2O, when Sir Knight is looking at the river, he's representing H2O. I mean, content-wise, is that the right thing to say?
Sure.
Okay, if that is, then I can say the content is goodness, and I can also say the content is pleasure, because that will go again. Yeah. But all you actually get if you don't know the identity, or in usual cases, is just you get goodness, and that's like thinking that's water. and then you gotta do the science I'm doing as I think, to figure out its H2O.
So the first premise is equivalent to X is good if and only if X is such that all possible moral perceivers should represent it as good.
Yeah, you can do it that way, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly, yes. Yeah, that's right, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay, let's stop torturing our speaker.
It was so much fun.